The auctioneer's voice cracked in the heat. "Last chance," he called, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief already dark with sweat. "She eats almost nothing." The crowd shifted boots, scraping dust bodies, leaning back as if distance alone could absolve them. The wooden platform stood in the center of Fort Benton's square, sun-bleached and splintered from years of use. Cattle had been traded there. Horses. Once even a condemned man. Today, a child. She stood barefoot on the boards, so small she barely reached the auctioneer's waist. Blood seeped from cuts on the soles of her feet, darkening the cracks in the wood beneath her toes. She did not cry. She did not sway or whimper or plead. She clutched a cloth doll to her chest. The fabric faded to the color of old bone, one button eye missing the other, hanging by a thread. Her name, Elias Crowder, would later learn was Ayanna. For now, she was only the last one. Elias stood at the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low, the brim casting a shadow over eyes that had seen too much and learned to expect nothing. He had come into town for horses. That was all. A gray gelding from a trader upriver. He had business waiting back at the ranch and a life arranged carefully to avoid moments like this. But the girl did not move. That was what held him. Most children would have cried by now, screamed, fought, even animals fought when cornered. This one simply stood there, eyes too large for her face, brown and empty in a way that suggested she had learned early that noise made things worse. "She's too small a farmer," muttered from the front. "Won't be useful for years." "Damaged," another voice said. "You can see it in her." A woman nearby clucked her tongue. "Poor thing. But we've already got 4 mouths to feed." The auctioneer cleared his throat. "She won't be a burden. Just needs a roof and scraps. $5 covers the placement." No one spoke. The silence stretched thick as the heat pressing down on the square. Elias felt it settle into his chest, heavy and familiar. He had lived inside that silence for 4 years, ever since the night his wife stopped breathing and their newborn son followed her into the ground 3 days later. He had learned how to survive it, how to keep moving without letting it touch him. The girl shifted her weight, just barely. Enough for Elias to see her flinch as pain shot through her feet. She tightened her grip on the doll, but still made no sound. The auctioneer's voice grew thin. "If nobody wants her, she'll be sent back upriver. The mission will find a place for her." Elias knew what that meant. Everyone did. The mission spoke of charity and order, but children went in and rarely came out the same. Some did not come out at all. He should have turned away. Instead, he found himself moving forward, boots crunching over the dirt, the crowd parting without invitation. He felt their eyes on him, recognition, curiosity, suspicion. Elias Crowder, rancher, widower, a man who kept to himself and paid his debts on time. He stopped at the edge of the platform. "Wait," he said. The word left his mouth before he had decided to speak. It sounded rough, scraped raw by disuse. The auctioneer blinked. "Sir, how much?" Elias said, not a question. The auctioneer hesitated. "The fee is $5, but placements are handled through Reverend Pritchard." "There are procedures." Elias pulled his wallet from his coat. He counted out $50, each bill crisp, and laid them on the podium one by one. The sound of paper against wood cut through the murmurs. "That should cover the fee," he said, "and whatever paperwork you need to invent." A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone laughed sharp and uncomfortable. "A bachelor buying a child," a man whispered. "Ain't right." Elias ignored them. He stepped up onto the platform, the boards creaking under his weight. The girl's eyes flicked to his boots, then to his hands. She stiffened her small body, bracing as if for impact. Elias stopped a few feet away and crouched slowly, careful not to loom. He had learned around horses that sudden movements broke trust faster than whips. "Hey," he said quietly. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, softened. "I'm not going to hurt you." The words felt inadequate the moment they left him. Promises were easy. Proof was not. She did not answer. Her fingers twisted into the doll's fabric knuckles, white. "That's a friend of yours," Elias nodded toward the doll. "You take good care of it." Her eyes followed his gaze. For a heartbeat, something flickered there. Not trust, not hope. Something older. Calculation. The auctioneer cleared his throat again. "If you'll just sign here, Mr. Crowder, I'm talking to her," Elias said without looking back. He shifted closer, lowering himself until he was eye level with the child. Up close, the damage was clearer. Hollow cheeks, bruises yellowing beneath the dirt. Scars too neat to be accidents. "I've got a ranch about 10 miles from here," he said. "Horses, grass, a place to sleep where no one yells." She watched his mouth as he spoke, as if measuring the shape of his words. "I'm going to pick you up," he went on. "I'll do it slow." He waited. A long moment passed. The sun burned. Sweat trickled down his spine. Then almost imperceptibly she nodded. Elias slid his arms beneath her, lifting with care. She weighed almost nothing. Her body went rigid in his grasp, every muscle locked, waiting for pain that did not come. "It's all right," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I've got you." He signed the papers one-handed, while the auctioneer muttered about regulations and consequences. The crowd parted as Elias carried the child down from the platform, whispers buzzing like flies. Scandal. Poor girl. What's he thinking? Elias did not look back. Outside the square, his wagon waited. He eased her onto the seat, mindful of her feet, and climbed up beside her. She sat perfectly still, doll pressed to her chest, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if afraid to look at him too closely. The horses started forward. Fort Benton began to fall away behind them. Only then did Elias let himself breathe. He glanced at the child, at the way she watched the world slide past with a wariness no 3-year-old should carry. He had not planned for this, had not wanted it. And yet, as the road stretched out ahead, the knew with a certainty that frightened him more than grief ever had, that whatever he had just done could not be undone. "What's your name?" he asked softly. For a while there was only the creak of wheels and the sound of hooves, then so quiet he almost missed it. She whispered, "Ayanna." Elias repeated it under his breath, testing the sound, and the wagon rolled on toward a life he had sworn he would never risk again. Elias Crowder had buried his wife and child 4 years earlier, and learned that surviving meant wanting nothing but the child asleep in his wagon made that lie impossible. The road out of Fort Benton narrowed quickly, the packed dirt giving way to ruts and tall grass that brushed the wagon wheels. Elias kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the reins, though every part of him was aware of the small body beside him. Ayanna sat exactly where he had placed her knees, drawn up, doll tucked beneath her chin. She did not lean against him. She did not ask anything of him at all. That more than her wounds unsettled him. He had expected fear, crying, even anger. Children had needs, they announced them. This one carried herself like someone who had learned early that need was a liability. The ranch came into view just as the light began to thin the sun, slipping low behind the distant line of cottonwoods along the river. The house stood plain and weathered gray boards, silvered by wind and time. A barn leaned slightly to the west roof, patched in 3 places, horses already nickering as they recognized the wagon. Ayana's gaze shifted at the sound. It lingered on the horses, her eyes following their movement with a focus she had not given anything else. Elias noticed. He said nothing. He reined in near the porch and climbed down, moving slowly, deliberately. When he reached for her, she tensed again, shoulders lifting, as if bracing for a blow. He paused, letting his hands hover. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You can stay there if you want." She did not move. After a moment, he climbed back up, lifted her as gently as before, and set her on the porch. Her bare feet touched the wood, and she sucked in a sharp breath but made no sound. Elias felt something twist inside him. The door opened before he could knock. Ruth Calder stood framed in the doorway. Her gray hair pinned back, tight sleeves rolled to the elbow. She had lived in that house longer than Elias had. Longer some days than he felt he had lived at all. She took in the scene in a single glance, the wagon, the child, the blood on the boards, and her mouth tightened. "Elias," she said. "What have you done?" "I brought someone home," he replied. Her eyes softened just a fraction, but the worry did not leave them. "I can see that." She knelt in front of Ayana without hesitation, her movements calm, practiced. "Hello there," she said. "You're safe here." Ayana's gaze flicked to Elias, then back to Ruth. She did not answer. Ruth looked up at him. "How long since she ate, I don't know." Ruth nodded once, already standing. "We'll start with bread and broth. Nothing heavy." She ushered them inside, closing the door firmly behind them, as if to shut the rest of the world out. The house smelled of soap and wood smoke. Familiar. Steady. Ayana hovered near the wall-eyes, tracking every movement. Elias stood uncertainly in the middle of the room, suddenly aware of how little space there was for a life he had not planned. Ruth returned with a bowl and set it on the table. She did not push it toward the child. She simply placed it where it could be seen. When Ayana did not move, Elias pulled out a chair and sat. He took a spoonful himself, ate it slowly. "It's good," he said. "Warm." Minutes passed. Finally, Ayana stepped forward. She took the bowl with both hands and carried it to the corner, turning her back to them as she ate. Each swallow was careful, measured, as if she expected the food to be taken away. Ruth watched her face composed. When the bowl was empty, she filled it again without comment and placed it in the same spot. Later, as dusk settled and the house grew quiet, Ruth pulled Elias aside. "This isn't like taking in a stray," she said. "You know that." "I know. The town will talk. They always do. This time they'll talk louder." Elias leaned against the table, suddenly exhausted. "I didn't plan it," he said. "I just couldn't leave her there." Ruth studied him for a long moment. "That's what frightens me," she said softly. "You've been careful for years. Careful men don't do things like this." He looked past her toward the corner where Ayana now slept, curled around her doll breath, shallow but steady. "I was careful when my wife died," he said. "Careful didn't save anyone." Ruth's expression softened. "No," she said. "It didn't." Night came fully. Elias lit the lamps and left them burning, though he rarely did anymore. Shadows crept into the corners of the room, stretching long across the floor. When it was time to sleep, Ruth led Ayana to the small bedroom off the main room. The bed had not been used in years. Elias had kept it made out of habit, not hope. Ayana stood rigid as Ruth laid her down, eyes wide, tracking every movement. When Ruth reached for the blanket, the child flinched so hard she nearly fell from the bed. Ruth froze. She looked at Elias, then back at the girl. "All right," Ruth said gently. "No blanket." She stepped back. Elias hesitated, then moved forward. "I'll be right here," he said, lowering himself into the chair just outside the door. He set the lamp on the floor beside him, its light spilling into the room. Ayana watched him. Her eyes did not close until long after his legs went numb and the house settled into its night sounds. Elias did not sleep. He sat and listened to the horses shifting in the barn, to the wind in the grass, to the shallow rhythm of a child's breathing. He thought of the looks in the square, of the way the auctioneer's voice had cracked, of the papers he had signed without reading. He thought of how easily a life could be altered by a single step forward. At some point the lamp guttered. He adjusted the wick, careful not to make noise. Ayana stirred a small sound, catching in her throat. Elias leaned forward, heart hammering, ready for cries that did not come. She went still again, fingers tightening around the doll. He stayed where he was until dawn began to lighten the edges of the sky. By morning the town would know. By morning questions would come. For now there was only the quiet, the child sleeping behind a half-open door, and the knowledge settling deeper into Elias Crowder's bones that whatever he had taken into his care would test every hard-earned wall he had built to survive. She ate like someone waiting to be punished for it, and when offered water, she flinched, as if pain had always followed kindness. Morning came quietly, thin light slipping through the uncurtained windows and laying pale stripes across the floor. Elias rose from the chair, stiff and aching his back, protesting the night spent half awake. For a moment, he simply stood there listening. The house was still. No cries, no movement, only the distant sound of a horse stamping in the barn. He leaned into the doorway. Ayana was awake. She sat upright on the bed, knees pulled to her chest doll, tucked beneath her chin. Her eyes were open, watchful, already alert to the world in a way that made his chest tighten. She had not kicked the blankets away or tangled herself in the sheets. She had not drooled or shifted in her sleep. It was as if she had never truly rested at all. "Morning," Elias said softly. Her gaze flicked to him, then away. Ruth moved behind him carrying a basin. She stopped short when she saw the child awake. "All right then," she said gently. "Let's start easy." She set the basin on the table, filled with warm water and a folded cloth. Elias watched Ayana's shoulders rise the moment she saw it. Her grip on the doll tightened until her knuckles whitened. "It's just to wash your hands," Ruth said. "No hurry." Ayana did not move. Elias felt the instinct to step in, to explain, to promise. He did none of it. He waited. Ruth tried again, lowering herself to the child's level. She dipped the cloth into the water and wrung it out slowly, deliberately, letting Ayana see each motion. Ayana's breath grew shallow, her eyes fixed on the basin as if it were something alive. "No," she whispered. The word was barely sound at all, more breath than voice. It was the first refusal Elias had heard from her, and it struck him harder than silence had. "All right," Ruth said at once. She slid the basin back out of sight. "We'll wait." Relief came in a rush so sudden it left Ayana trembling. She folded in on herself, rocking once before stilling again, as if afraid that too much reaction would undo the mercy she'd been given. They ate breakfast without water, dry bread and a bit of salt pork cut into pieces small enough to manage. Elias took his time, keeping his movements slow, unthreatening. Ayana ate crouched near the wall, turning her back to them again. Every few bites she paused, listening, eyes darting toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in and take it away. When she finished, she tucked the last piece into the pocket of her dress. Elias pretended not to notice. Ruth noticed everything and said nothing. Later, when Elias carried a bucket outside to draw fresh water from the pump, Ayana followed him as far as the threshold. She stopped there, toes curling against the wood, eyes locked on the bucket. The water sloshed gently inside. Elias froze. He set the bucket down slowly and backed away. "You don't have to come out," he said. "You don't have to do anything." She watched him retreat, confusion flickering across her face. The world as she understood it did not usually move backward for her comfort. Ruth joined him on the porch. "She's afraid of the water," she said quietly. "I can see that." "Not of water," Ruth corrected. "Of what comes with it." Elias nodded. He did not ask her to say more. The day unfolded carefully. Elias went about his chores with a new awareness, as if the ground beneath his feet had shifted. Every sound felt louder. Every movement mattered. He found himself narrating what he did aloud, opening a door, lifting a bucket, stepping outside so the child would not be startled by sudden noise. Ayanna trailed behind him like a shadow, never close enough to touch, never far enough to be alone. When a horse snorted in the barn, she jumped. When a board creaked, she stiffened. Once, when a chicken flapped unexpectedly, she dropped to the ground and covered her head with her arms. Elias stopped where he was. "It's all right," he said, keeping his voice low. "No one's angry." She did not look up until the bird wandered off, clucking, offended by the attention. Ruth watched from the porch, her hands folded in her apron. She had raised children before. She knew the signs of hunger and stubbornness, of fever and grief. This was something else. This was a child who had learned the shape of danger too young and too well. In the afternoon, Ruth tried again with the water. She brought a cup this time, small and chipped, and set it near the bread. Ayanna stared at it as if it might bite. "You don't have to drink," Ruth said. "It's just there." Minutes passed. Elias repaired a fence rail nearby, his movements steady and repetitive. He did not look at the cup. Finally, Ayanna reached out, touched the rim with one finger. She flinched as if struck. The cup tipped, spilling water across the floor. Ayanna recoiled, scrambling backward until she hit the wall. Her breath came fast and ragged eyes wide with terror. Elias dropped the hammer and knelt, hands open, palms visible. "No," he said firmly, the word meant for the memory that had seized her, not for the child herself. "No one's going to hurt you." She shook her body, locked in a silent scream. Ruth moved without haste, mopping the spill, her presence calm and ordinary. "It's just water," she said. "It's gone now." Slowly, Ayanna's breathing eased. She did not uncurl, but the panic loosened its grip. Elias stayed where he was until she looked at him again. When she did, there was something new in her eyes, not trust, but uncertainty. As if she had expected pain and found none, and did not know what to make of the absence. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the yard, Elias brought Ayanna a small wooden cup instead of the chipped one. He set it beside her with a single finger, then stepped back. "It's yours," he said. "You can use it when you want." She did not touch it. When night fell, Elias lit the lamps again. He ate sparingly, aware of her watching him. Afterward, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the piece of bread she had hidden earlier. "You can keep it," he said, setting it beside her doll. "No one's taking it." She stared at it, then at him. Later, when Ruth had gone to her own room and the house had grown quiet, Ayanna sat awake on the bed, eyes fixed on the door. Elias took his place in the chair outside, lamp burning low. She studied him for a long time. Then tentatively she slid off the bed and padded toward the doorway. She stopped just inside the frame, close enough that he could see the faint scars on her arms, the way her ribs showed through her dress. She reached out and touched the sleeve of his shirt with one finger. Elias did not move. After a moment, she withdrew her hand and returned to the bed. But when she lay down, she turned her face toward the open door. Sleep came easier that night. In the morning, Elias would bring her outside again. He had seen the way her eyes followed the horses, the way her shoulders eased when they moved. He did not yet understand why, but he sensed that whatever language she still trusted, it was not spoken with words. She trusted the horse's breath before she trusted any human voice, and Elias understood that healing would come on 4 legs before 2. The morning broke cool and clear, the kind of early summer day that smelled of damp earth and grass. Elias opened the barn doors, slowly, letting the light spill in. The horses lifted their heads, ears, flicking eyes, calm. He stood aside and waited. Ayana lingered at the edge of the yard. She had followed him out of the house without being asked, bare feet, padding across the boards and down into the dirt. She stopped when the barn came fully into view, her body going still, as if she had reached a boundary she could not yet cross. Elias said nothing. He leaned against the fence rail and busied himself with a loose strap, giving her space to decide. The horses breathed low and steady. A bay mare shifted her weight and snorted softly, a sound that held no threat. Ayana tilted her head, listening. Her eyes moved from stall to stall, drawn by the quiet presence inside. She took one step forward, then another. The mare stretched her neck over the stall door, nostrils flaring as she caught the child's scent. Ayana froze, breath caught high in her chest. Elias tensed, ready to intervene, but the mare only exhaled a warm rush of air that stirred the hair at Ayana's temple. The child did not flinch. She leaned in cautiously, as if approaching something sacred. When the mare's breath brushed her cheek again, Ayana closed her eyes. A sound escaped her, then not a cry, not quite a laugh. A small, surprised breath like the release of something held too long. Elias felt his throat tighten. He moved closer, slow and deliberate, and placed his hand on the mare's neck. "Easy," he murmured. The horse did not move. She watched the child with patient eyes, tail swishing once. Ayana opened her eyes and looked at Elias. For the first time, her gaze did not slide away. It lingered, measuring him against what she felt beneath her hand. "She won't hurt you," he said. "Her name's Willow." The child's fingers trembled as she reached out. She touched the mare's neck with 2 fingers, then her whole palm. The warmth startled her. She pulled back, then reached out again, more certain. "She's warm," Ayana whispered. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Elias barely breathed. "That's right," he said. "She's alive." Ayana's hand stayed where it was. Her shoulders loosened. She leaned her forehead against the mare's neck, trusting without thinking it through. The horse shifted, careful not to knock her off balance. Ruth watched from the doorway, hands clasped in front of her apron. She said nothing, but her eyes shone. Elias showed Ayana how to brush Willow's coat, guiding her hand along the smooth grain of hair. The rhythm soothed her. Each stroke seemed to pull her further into the moment, anchoring her to something solid and real. She did not look at Elias again for a long while. She did not need to. When the brush slipped from her hand and hit the dirt, she jumped, breath hitching. Elias waited. The mare flicked an ear, but stayed calm. Ayana looked up at Willow, saw that nothing had changed, and bent to retrieve the brush herself. Later, when Elias led Willow out into the yard, Ayana followed without hesitation. She walked beside the horse, her hand wrapped loosely in the mane, feet, dusty, face intent. "You can ride her someday?" Elias said, the thought coming unbidden. Ayana glanced at him. "Someday," she echoed, as if testing the idea of a future. They spent the rest of the morning in the barn. Elias worked while Ayana stayed close, helping where she could, learning by watching. She mimicked his movements, her small hands copying the way he tied knots, the way he moved around the animals without startling them. When a horse stamped suddenly, she startled but did not collapse into fear. She reached for Willow instead, grounding herself against the familiar warmth. By midday, she was dusty and tired, her steps slower. Ruth brought bread and a bit of cheese out to the yard. Ayana ate, sitting in the shade back against the fence, Willow's flank pressed close beside her. She drank water from the wooden cup without flinching, the horse's presence steadying her. Elias watched something like wonder settling in his chest. He had thought healing would be loud or dramatic. He had thought it would require words he did not have. Instead, it came quietly in shared breath and patient silence. In the afternoon, a breeze kicked up, rustling the grass and carrying the smell of rain from far off. Elias turned his attention back to work, fixing a loose hinge on the corral gate. Ayana sat nearby, plaiting bits of grass together, her doll tucked safely at her side. A rider appeared at the far edge of the property, a dark figure against the pale sweep of land. Elias noticed him immediately. His body tightened, old instincts stirring. Visitors were rare and rarely welcome. The rider approached at an easy pace, reins loose. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between the man and the child without thinking. Ayana looked up, eyes tracking the stranger, her body going still again. The rider pulled up short of the yard. He tipped his hat. "Afternoon," he called. Elias nodded. "Afternoon. I was told I might find you out here," the man said. He glanced past Elias, his eyes catching on Ayana, then flicking away. "Name's Jacob Hensley. I ride for Reverend Pritchard." Elias felt the air change like a sudden drop in pressure before a storm. He did not look back at Ayana, but he felt her shift behind him, felt the quiet retreat into herself. "What does the Reverend want?" Elias asked. "Just a word," Hensley said. "About a child you took from Fort Benton." Elias's jaw tightened. "She's not for discussion." Hensley lifted a hand placatingly. "I'm just the messenger. Then you can tell him she's safe and she's staying." Hensley hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly. "There are procedures," he said. "Placements go through the mission. Papers get filed." "I paid," Elias said, "and I signed." Hensley shrugged. "Might not be enough." Behind him, Ayana's hand found Willow's mane. Elias felt it as surely as if she had touched him instead. "You done?" Elias asked. Hensley studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "For now." He turned his horse and rode away, the sound of hooves fading into the open land. Elias did not relax until the rider was out of sight. When he turned, he found Ayana watching him, her face pale but composed. She did not ask anything. She simply stepped closer to Willow, pressing her cheek into the mare's side. Elias crouched beside her. "You're all right," he said. She nodded once. That night, as the light faded and the horses settled, Elias sat on the porch and watched Ayana sleep through the open door, her breathing deeper than it had been before. The smell of hay and leather clung to her clothes. He knew then that whatever waited beyond the edge of his land would not be gentle. He also knew with a certainty that frightened and steadied him all at once, that he would not turn back. The Reverend smiled as he spoke of order and charity, and Elias felt the old truth settle in his bones, that evil rarely announces itself as cruelty. Reverend Silas Pritchard arrived just after noon, his buggy rolling up the drive, with the unhurried confidence of a man accustomed to being welcomed. The horse was clean, well-fed, its harness polished. Elias saw it all from the corral and felt his shoulders tighten before the buggy even stopped. Ayana was sitting on the fence rail, Willow's head resting near her knee. At the sound of wheels on gravel, she went still. Her hand slid into the mare's mane without looking. Elias walked toward the house and met the buggy halfway. He did not offer his hand. Mr. Crowder Pritchard said pleasantly as he climbed down. He was a tall man, neatly dressed, despite the dust, his collar stiff, his boots fine leather rather than work-worn. His eyes were pale and attentive. "Thank you for seeing me." "I didn't invite you," Elias said. Pritchard smiled as if this were a small misunderstanding. "Of course. I trust you'll forgive the intrusion. Matters involving children are best addressed promptly." Elias did not move aside. "Say what you came to say." Pritchard's gaze drifted past him just briefly toward the yard. He noticed Ayanna immediately. Men like him always did. He schooled his expression into something warm and regretful. "She looks settled," he said. "I'm glad to see she's being cared for." "She is," Elias replied. "By me, yes." Pritchard folded his hands. "That's precisely what concerns the mission." Elias waited. "The child was under our stewardship." Pritchard continued. "Her placement was not complete. There are forms, approvals, processes meant to protect everyone involved." Protect who? Elias asked exactly. Pritchard's smile did not falter. "The children, of course, and the good people who take them in. Unregulated arrangements can lead to misunderstandings." "I paid," Elias said. "I signed what they put in front of me." "The auctioneer exceeded his authority," Pritchard said gently. "I'm sure you understand. I understand he was selling a child." Pritchard's eyes sharpened for just a moment before softening again. "We prefer the term placement. Language matters." "It does," Elias agreed. "And so does what it hides." Pritchard sighed as if burdened by Elias's stubbornness. "Mr. Crowder, I don't doubt your intentions. Truly. But you are a single man. No wife, no formal ties to the church. People will ask questions. Let them. They will not be kind," Pritchard said. "And the child may suffer for it." Elias felt something cold settle behind his ribs. "You threatening me? Of course not." Pritchard shook his head, almost amused. "I'm offering guidance. There are families approved by the mission, homes with structure, with moral oversight." Ayanna shifted on the fence rail. Elias felt it without turning. "She's not going anywhere," he said. Pritchard studied him the way one studies a problem that has become inconvenient. "There is another matter," he said. "A benefactor has already expressed interest in the girl." Elias's jaw tightened. "Who?" "A widow," Pritchard said. "Mrs. Beatrice Latham, a woman of means and standing. She has supported the mission generously." Elias's voice was low. "She didn't want her at the auction." Pritchard inclined his head. "Circumstances change. So does opportunity," Elias said. The Reverend smiled again, thin and patient. "I'll give you time to reconsider. I suggest you speak with counsel. The law is not always kind to men who act outside its boundaries." "I'll see you off," Elias said. Pritchard hesitated, then nodded. "For now." As the buggy rolled away, Elias stood until the dust settled. Only then did he turn. Ayanna had slid down from the fence and was standing beside Willow, one hand buried deep in the mare's mane. Her eyes were fixed on the retreating shape of the buggy, her face unreadable. "He's gone," Elias said. She nodded once. That afternoon passed under a low, heavy sky. Elias worked the fence line, his thoughts circling. He had known this would not end quietly. He had not known how quickly it would begin. Ruth found him by the barn near evening. She had heard about the visit from a neighbor already. News traveled fast when it had something to chew on. "They'll come at you through the law," she said. "And through the church." "I know." "She's marked now," Ruth said softly. "Children like her always are." Elias watched Ayana sit in the dirt arranging stones into careful lines. Not while she's here. Ruth placed a hand on his arm. Then you'd better be ready to fight smarter than they do. That night, Elias sat at the table long after Ayana had gone to bed. The lamp cast a tight circle of light over the worn wood. He pulled the papers from his coat pocket and read them slowly. They were vague, intentionally so. He folded them back up with care. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Elias stepped onto the porch and looked out over his land. The river glinted faintly in the distance. Beyond it, the world stretched wide and unforgiving. He thought of the Blackfeet land, further north of the old boundaries, drawn and redrawn by men with ink and confidence. He thought of how easily a child could be claimed, renamed, erased. When he went back inside, he paused outside Ayana's room. She slept on her side doll, tucked beneath her arm, Willow's scent still clinging to her clothes. Her face was softer now, less guarded, as if some part of her had dared to rest. Elias sat in the chair and kept watch. He knew now that whatever had followed her to his door would not stop with polite words and smiles. And as the night deepened, he felt the shape of a decision forming, not sharp or sudden, but heavy and permanent, settling into place alongside the grief he had once believed was all he had left. Two Bears said nothing at first, only watched the child watch the river, and then spoke. A hurt child believes the world tells the truth, with its hands, not its mouth. Elias rode out before dawn, the sky still bruised purple and gray. He left Ruth a note on the table, brief and plain, and woke Ayana gently. She did not protest when he lifted her onto the saddle in front of him, only clutched the pommel and leaned back against his chest. Her body stiff at first, then easing as the horse settled into its stride. They crossed the shallow bend of the Marias River, where the water ran wide and slow. Morning mist hovered above it, curling like breath. Elias guided the horse along the bank, following a path worn thin by hooves and years. He had not been this way in a long time. Not since his father was alive. Not since the land had begun to feel divided by lines he did not trust. Ayana watched everything: the water, the reeds, the way the light moved across the surface. When the horse snorted at the scent of damp earth, she flinched, then relaxed, when nothing followed. They found two bears near the river bend, as Elias had expected. The old man sat on a fallen cottonwood, hands resting on his knees, eyes on the current, as if he were listening to it speak. His hair was long and white, braided neatly down his back. A blanket lay folded beside him. Two Bears did not look up when Elias reined in. Elias dismounted slowly and lifted Ayana down. She stayed close to him, one hand gripping his coat. The horse shifted, stamping once, then stilled. Only then did Two Bears turn. His gaze moved first to the horse, then to Elias, and finally to the child. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply looked, and Elias felt the weight of that attention more keenly than he had felt the Reverend's scrutiny. "You brought a small one," Two Bears said at last. "Yes," Elias replied. "Her name is Ayana." Two Bears nodded once, as if acknowledging a fact already known. He did not ask how she had come to Elias. He gestured to the blanket. Ayana hesitated. Elias knelt beside her. "It's all right," he said. "We're staying." She studied Two Bears, then the blanket. Slowly she crossed the space between them and sat folding her legs beneath her. She kept the doll tucked close. Two Bears watched her hands, the way her fingers worried the fabric. "She listens with her body," he said. "That is how children survive when words are dangerous." Elias swallowed. "She was hurt." "Yes." Elias blinked. You know, Two Bears turned his eyes back to the river. I know hurt when it walks, he said. It walks carefully. For a while no one spoke. The river slid past, patient and indifferent. A bird cried somewhere upstream. Elias shifted his weight. They're coming for her, he said. The mission. The church. Two Bears nodded. They come for many. They say it's for her good. Two Bears' mouth twitched, not quite a smile. They always say that. Ayanna leaned forward, reaching toward the water. Elias tensed, but Two Bears lifted a hand palm open. Let her, he said. Ayanna's fingers brushed the surface. She gasped softly at the cold, then laughed a small, surprised sound. She did not recoil. Two Bears watched her, something like sorrow passing through his eyes. She has not been allowed to choose, he said. Even this is new. Elias felt heat rise behind his eyes. He looked away, ashamed of it. I don't know what to do, he said. I can't lose her. Two Bears studied him, then really studied him, as if peeling back layers Elias had spent years hardening. You already know how to lose, he said. That is why you are afraid. Elias nodded. I buried my wife, my son. Two Bears was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Loss does not mean you are empty. It means you have carried something worth carrying. Ayanna splashed again, more confident now. Water darkened the hem of her dress. She did not seem to notice. They will speak loudly, Two Bears went on. They will bring papers, laws. They will tell you they are right. And what should I tell them? Elias asked. Two Bears' eyes returned to the child. Do not tell them, he said. Show them. Elias frowned. Show them what? That she is alive, Two Bears said. That she is choosing. That she is not broken property. Ayanna turned, then holding out her wet hand, as if to show them something important. Two Bears extended his finger and let her trace the lines in his skin with water. She smiled. Elias had never seen her smile so openly. Two Bears' voice softened. She will learn the world again by watching what stays, he said. Stay. Elias felt the word settle deep, heavier than any promise. They stayed by the river until the sun climbed higher. Two Bears told Ayanna stories without raising his voice. Stories of animals who learned patience and rivers that remembered every footstep. She listened, head tilted, absorbing the rhythm more than the words. When it was time to leave, Two Bears stood and placed the folded blanket over Ayanna's shoulders. It was too big for her, but she did not shrug it off. For warmth, he said, and for knowing where you have been. Ayanna touched the edge of it, then looked at Elias. Home, she asked. Yes, Elias said. Home. The ride back felt shorter. Ayanna leaned against him, her weight no longer rigid. When they crested the rise near the ranch, Elias saw Ruth waiting on the porch, hands clasped. But something else waited too. A figure stood near the fence-line horse, hitched posture, stiff and official. Even at a distance, Elias recognized the shape of trouble. His jaw set. He drew the reins tight. Behind him, Ayanna stirred her fingers, tightening in his coat. Elias urged the horse forward, already feeling the pull of what Two Bears had said settle into his bones. He would stay. Whatever came next, he would stay. The paper said, custody. But Elias heard only the sound of a door closing on a child who had just begun to believe she belonged somewhere. The man by the fence wore a dark coat despite the heat and held his hat against his chest as Elias rode up. He did not smile. He waited, feet planted, as if the ground itself had instructed him to stand there. Ruth stepped down from the porch, her face already tight with understanding. Elias dismounted and lifted Ayanna down. She clung to his coat, the blanket Two Bears had given her slipping down her shoulder. Her eyes flicked from the stranger to Ruth and back again, measuring the space between them. "You Elias Crowder?" the man asked. "Yes." The man reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. He did not hand it over right away. "Name's Frank Miller," he said. "I'm a clerk for the territorial court." Elias felt the word clerk settle like a stone in his gut. "This concerns the minor child in your care," Miller continued. "Ayanna." Ayanna's fingers tightened in Elias's coat. "I need you to take this," Miller said, holding out the paper at last. Elias took it but did not open it. He could feel Ruth's eyes on him, feel Ayanna's breath against his side. "You're being summoned," Miller said. "There's a hearing set in Fort Benton." "For what?" Elias asked. Miller cleared his throat. "Custody, placement irregularities, allegations of unlawful acquisition." Ruth made a sharp sound under her breath. Elias nodded once. "When?" 10 days, Miller said. "I'd advise you to seek counsel." Elias folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his pocket. "You done?" Miller hesitated. His gaze drifted to Ayanna, then away again, as if he did not want to be accused of seeing too much. "For now," he said. He mounted his horse and rode off without another word. The yard felt too quiet after he left. Ruth spoke first. "They're moving faster than I hoped. They always do," Elias said. Ayanna tugged at his sleeve. "Go," she whispered. Elias knelt, bringing himself level with her. "No," he said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." She studied his face, searching for something he could not name. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, at least for the moment. She nodded once and pressed the blanket closer around her shoulders. That night, the house did not settle easily. The wind rattled the windows, and every sound felt sharp. Ayanna ate little, her appetite gone as quickly as it had come. She sat close to Elias at the table, her shoulder brushing his arm, as if anchoring herself. When it was time for bed, she hesitated at the doorway. Her eyes flicked to the chair where Elias usually sat, then to the door itself. "I'll be right here," he said. She climbed into bed, but did not lie down. She sat with her back against the wall, knees drawn up, doll clutched tight. Elias took his place in the chair. He could feel the paper in his pocket like a live thing. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it came hard. Ayanna woke with a cry just after midnight. A sound ripped from her chest before she could stop it. Elias was on his feet instantly, crossing the room in 2 strides. She was shaking, eyes wide, and unseeing breath coming in gasps. He crouched beside the bed, keeping his hands visible. "It's all right," he said. "You're here. I'm here." She did not seem to hear him. Her body curled inward, arms wrapping around her head as if to protect it. Elias sat on the floor, close enough that she could see him, if she looked far enough that he did not crowd her. He spoke softly, naming things she knew. The horses, the river, Willow. Slowly the shaking eased. Her eyes focused. She looked at him, then at the door, then back at him again. "They take," she whispered. "No," Elias said. "They don't." She searched his face again. Whatever she found there, she held onto it like a lifeline. Morning came gray and low. Elias saddled his horse early and rode into town, leaving Ruth with Ayanna. He did not tell the child where he was going, only that he would be back. Fort Benton was already awake, the streets busy with wagons and voices. Elias went straight to the small office above the general store, where Thomas Avery kept his practice. Avery was young, his hair still dark, his desk cluttered with books and papers that suggested ambition not yet dulled by defeat. He listened without interrupting as Elias laid the summons on the desk. They're leaning on the mission's authority, Avery said when Elias finished, and on public discomfort. They won't win on the truth, Elias said. No, Avery agreed. Which is why they'll try to win on procedure. Avery leaned back, steepling his fingers. You'll need witnesses, he said. Documentation. Anyone who can speak to the child's condition. There's a doctor, Elias said, and a school teacher. Clara Boone. Avery nodded. Good. We'll need both. When Elias left the office, he felt no lighter, but he felt less alone. He returned home to find Ayanna sitting on the porch with Ruth shelling peas into a bowl. She looked up when she saw him, relief flashing across her face before she could hide it. You stayed, she said. I said I would. That night, Elias sat outside her room again, the lamp burning low. He could hear her breathing deeper now, steadier. But even as sleep claimed her, her fingers twitched, as if ready to hold on if the world shifted again. Elias sat and listened, the paper in his pocket, a reminder of what waited. He thought of Two Bears' words, of the river's patience, of what it meant to stay. And he knew that whatever the court decided, the fight had already begun. She did not scream when the doctor touched her scars. She simply went still, as if pain were something to be waited out. The doctor arrived just after noon, his buggy rolling into the yard, with the cautious pace of a man who knew he was stepping into something he could not easily leave. Elias had sent word the night before through Clara Boone, careful in his phrasing, careful not to name more than was necessary. The man who came was older, his hair thinning his eyes, tired in a way that suggested he had seen more than illness. Ayanna watched from the porch, her body already tense. She had sensed the change in the air the moment Elias began moving chairs and clearing the table. She stood close to Ruth, one hand knotted in the fabric of her skirt, the other gripping the blanket from the river. This doesn't have to happen, Elias said quietly to the doctor as they stepped inside. If you think it does, the doctor replied. If you want the truth to stand. Elias nodded. He had known the answer before he asked. They spoke to Ayanna together. Elias knelt in front of her, keeping his voice low and steady. This is a doctor, he said. He's here to look, not to hurt. I'll stay the whole time. Her eyes flicked to the man, then back to Elias. Stay, she said. I will. They set up in the small bedroom, the light drawn wide to chase away shadows. Ruth stood by the door, her presence solid, familiar. The doctor washed his hands slowly, deliberately, letting the child see each motion. Ayanna sat on the bed legs tucked beneath her doll, pressed to her chest. When the doctor approached, she stiffened her body, locking into itself. Elias sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You can tell me to stop, the doctor said gently. Anytime. She did not answer. The doctor began with what was visible, bruises fading into yellow and green along her arms. Scars too straight to be accidents. Elias felt each one like a blow, his jaw tightening, his hands curling into fists. He forced himself to unclench. When the doctor lifted her sleeve, Ayanna's breath caught. She did not cry. She did not pull away. She simply went still, eyes fixed on a point on the wall, as if waiting for something inevitable. Elias leaned closer. You're doing all right, he murmured. I'm here. The doctor worked carefully, his touch light respectful. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He did not linger longer than he had to. Still, when he moved to examine her back, Ayanna's body trembled once, a small shudder she could not control. No more, she whispered. The doctor froze instantly. That's enough, he said. He stepped back, lowering his hands. Ayanna's shoulders sagged, relief flooding her so suddenly she nearly collapsed. Elias caught her, wrapping an arm around her without thinking. She pressed her face into his shirt, breathing hard. "It's done," he said softly. "You did good." She nodded against him, then pushed back just enough to look at the doctor. "No hurt," she said. "No hurt," the doctor agreed. Afterward, Ayanna sat on the floor by the window doll in her lap, tracing patterns in the dust with one finger. She did not speak. She did not need to. The weight of what had been seen pressed down on the room. The doctor sat at the table with Elias and Ruth. He wrote slowly, his pen scratching across the paper, pausing now and then, as if choosing his words with care. "This will not be easy to hear," he said finally, looking up at Elias. "But it needs to be said plainly." Elias met his gaze. "Say it." "She's been subjected to repeated harm," the doctor said. "Over time. Not an accident. Not a single incident." Ruth closed her eyes. "The patterns suggest restraint," the doctor continued. "Punishment. Deprivation." Elias felt heat surge through him, sharp and blinding. He gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. He did not speak. If he did, he was not sure he could stop. "I will testify to this," the doctor said, "if asked." "Thank you," Elias managed. When the doctor left, the house felt too small. Elias went outside, pacing the yard, his boots tearing at the dirt. He wanted to ride, to break something, to find Reverend Pritchard and demand answers he already knew would not come. Instead, he forced himself to stop. He went back inside and found Ayanna sitting beside Ruth, shelling peas with careful concentration. Her hands moved slowly, methodically, as if order itself were a comfort. Elias knelt in front of her. "You don't have to do anything else today," he said. She looked up at him. "I stay," she said. "Yes," he said. "You stay." That night she refused to sleep alone. She did not say it outright. She simply lay awake, eyes open, breath shallow, until Elias understood. He brought his chair closer to the bed, the lamp casting a warm circle of light. "Here," he said. "I won't move." She watched him for a long moment, then turned onto her side, her back to him, as if daring herself to trust the space behind her. Sleep came in fits. She startled once, reaching out blindly. Elias was there before she could panic, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the mattress. "I've got you," he said. She nodded, eyes closing again. In the morning, Clara Boone arrived with a basket of bread and jam, her face serious but kind. She listened as Elias told her what the doctor had found. Her mouth tightened, her hands stilling in her lap. "There are others," she said quietly. "Children who passed through that place. I've heard things over the years. Whispers." "Can you find them?" Elias asked. Clara nodded. "I'll try." The day passed with a strange calm. Ayanna spent most of it near the barn, brushing willow, her movements slow and careful. Elias watched her, noting how she chose the horse when the house felt too heavy. As the sun dipped low, Elias felt the shape of what lay ahead settle more firmly into place. The truth was no longer just his to carry. It was written now, witnessed, ready to be spoken aloud. That night, as he sat outside Ayanna's room, he knew the fight had crossed a line. It was no longer about keeping what he had taken in a moment of instinct. It was about naming what had been done and standing still long enough for others to see it too. They spoke of children who left smiling and never returned, and Elias understood that saving one child had made him responsible for seeing the rest. Clara Boone came in the late afternoon with dust on her hem, and a look that told Elias not to ask questions until she sat down. She set her basket on the table without ceremony, and took a breath that did not quite steady her. "There are names," she said. "Not all of them, but enough." Ayanna was on the floor near the window, lining up pebbles she'd brought in from the yard. She glanced up at the sound of Clara's voice, then went back to her careful work. Elias watched her for a moment before turning his attention back to Clara. Who, he asked. Former students, Clara said. Children who passed through the mission. Some went to farms, some to households in town, some disappeared. She folded her hands, then unfolded them. I spoke to 3 today. 2 are grown now. 1 is barely past 16. Ruth drew a chair back and sat. Will they talk? They're afraid, Clara said. But they're also tired. Elias nodded. He knew that feeling. What did they say? Clara closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. They said the same things, though they've never met. That kindness was used like bait. That obedience was rewarded until it wasn't. That punishment came quiet and regular like chores. Her voice tightened. They said children were sent away in wagons and never seen again. Ayana's fingers paused over the stones. She did not look up. Elias felt the room narrow around him. Names, he said. Do they know who took them? Clara hesitated. They know who signed the papers. Ruth's mouth set. The mission. And benefactors, Clara said. People who didn't want children for family. They wanted them for work. Or worse. Elias stood and paced to the window, then back again. He forced himself to slow down. Anger was loud. He needed quiet. Will they testify? He asked. Yes, Clara said. If they can speak without being alone. You won't be, Elias said. None of you will. That night, Elias rode into town again this time, with purpose that felt heavier than fear. Thomas Avery met him at the office with a stack of papers and a look that suggested he already knew the direction things were moving. They're circling, Avery said. The mission's attorneys are requesting delays. They're confident. They shouldn't be. Elias replied. Avery raised an eyebrow. Elias laid out what Clara had found, each word measured. Avery listened, his pen stilling. That changes things, Avery said quietly. It turns a dispute into a pattern. Can you protect them? Elias asked. The ones who will speak. Avery nodded. I can request closed testimony. And depositions. It won't stop retaliation, but it will limit it. Do it. When Elias returned home, the house was quiet. Ayana lay asleep on the bed doll tucked under her arm, the blanket from the river folded around her shoulders. Elias sat in the chair and watched her breathe. He wondered how many children had slept like this, once hopeful, guarded, before being taken again. In the days that followed, people came to the ranch in small, careful groups. Clara brought them 1 or 2 at a time, introducing them without titles. They did not sit at the table at first. They hovered near the door, near the windows, choosing their exits. Elias did not press them. He offered coffee, bread, silence. They spoke when they were ready. One man, his hands scarred and thick, told of being sent to a farm upriver. They said it was a good place, he said. Said I'd learn a trade. He swallowed. I learned how to work until I fell down. A woman in her 20s spoke next, her voice flat. They cut my hair and gave me a new name. Said the old one was heathen. She glanced at Ayana, then away. I stopped answering to anything for a while. A boy barely old enough to shave stared at the floor. My brother went with a lady from town, he said. She wore gloves, smelled like soap. He smiled when he left. His voice broke. He didn't come back. Elias listened. He did not interrupt. He did not promise more than he could give. When they were done, he thanked them. When they left, he stood on the porch and watched until they were gone. Ayana watched too from the doorway. She did not ask questions. She did not need to. One evening, she climbed into Elias's lap without warning. He froze, then relaxed when she settled her head against his chest. They go, she said quietly. Yes, he said. Not come, she added. No, he said. some don't. She was silent for a long moment. Then she asked, why? Elias closed his eyes. He did not know how to answer that in a way that would not break something fragile. Because people forget to see, he said finally, and because it's easier to take than to care. She considered that. You see, she said. Yes, he said, his voice rough. I see. The day before the hearing, Elias rode to the edge of his land and stopped where the grass gave way to scrub. He thought of 2 bears of the river's patient memory. He thought of how many stories the land held pressed into it by feet that had passed and not returned. That night, Clara stayed late going over names and dates with Avery by lamplight. Ruth brought stew and did not ask if anyone was hungry. Ayanna slept on the couch, her breathing slow and even worn out by the weight of the house being full of voices. When it was done, Avery folded his papers. This will be hard, he said. They'll try to make it about you. I can take it, Elias replied. Avery nodded. I think you can. Elias walked Clara to her wagon. The moon was high, pale, and steady. Thank you, he said. She shook her head. This was always there, she said. You just gave it a place to stand. Inside, Elias sat again by Ayanna's side. He watched her sleep the steady rise and fall of her chest. He knew now that what he had begun could not end with a single verdict. But tomorrow, at least, there would be witnesses. Tomorrow, the quiet would be broken by voices that refused to be erased. He stayed where he was, holding the silence together, ready to carry what came next. I don't know how to be a father, Elias said, but I know what happens when no one tries. The courtroom in Fort Benton was smaller than Elias had imagined, its windows tall and narrow, letting in pale morning light that did little to warm the room. The benches were already half full when he arrived, the air thick with murmurs that hushed as he passed. Some faces he recognized. Others he did not. All of them watched. Ayanna walked beside him, her small hand tucked into his coat pocket, fingers wrapped tight around the fabric. She wore a clean dress Ruth had mended the night before, and the blanket from the river rested across her shoulders like a quiet shield. She did not look at the crowd. Her eyes stayed on the floor until they reached the front bench. Reverend Silas Pritchard sat across the aisle posture, straight hands folded over a leather Bible. Beatrice Latham sat beside him, gloved hands resting in her lap, her face composed and pale. She did not look at the child. Thomas Avery leaned close to Elias. Answer only what you're asked, he murmured, and don't rush. Elias nodded. The judge entered, an older man with a lined face and eyes that missed little. He called the room to order, his voice calm but firm. Papers were read, charges named. Words like custody, jurisdiction, placement filled the space, heavy and impersonal. When Reverend Pritchard spoke, he did so smoothly, his tone measured. He spoke of order, of charity, of the dangers of impulsive decisions made outside the guidance of the church. He spoke of Elias as a man acting out of grief, unmoored, unfit. Elias listened, his jaw set. Beatrice Latham followed, her voice soft, almost sorrowful. She spoke of her resources, her standing, her desire to provide a stable home. She spoke as if the child were an idea rather than a person. Then Thomas Avery stood. He called the doctor first. The room shifted as the man took the stand, his words plain and unadorned. He described what he had seen, what could not be explained away. He did not raise his voice. He did not soften the truth. Elias watched the judge's face change, the lines deepening around his mouth. Former orphans followed. One by one they spoke, some haltingly, some with anger, some with a flatness that frightened Elias more than rage ever could. They told of renamed lives, of wagons that took children away, of silence enforced like law. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge called for quiet more than once. When Elias was called, he rose slowly. He felt the weight of the room settle onto his shoulders as he took the stand. "State your name," the clerk said. "Elias Crowder, and your relationship to the child in question." Elias looked at Ayanna before answering. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm the man who took her home," he said. Pritchard objected. Avery countered. The judge allowed it. "Why did you remove the child from the auction?" Avery asked. "Because no one else did," Elias replied. "And since then, I've fed her. I've given her a place to sleep. I've stayed." Pritchard rose. "Mr. Crowder," he said, "are you married?" "No." "Do you attend church regularly?" "No." "And you believe yourself fit to raise a child alone?" Elias did not answer right away. He thought of the chair by the bed, of the river, of Willow's patient breath. "I don't know how to be a father," he said, "but I know what happens when no one tries." The words settled into the room like dust after a fall. "Do you love the child?" Pritchard pressed. Elias met his gaze. "Yes." There was a pause. Then the judge spoke. "Call the child." The room stilled. Ayanna stood slowly. Elias felt the instinct to reach for her to stop this before it could harm her, but he stayed where he was. This was her moment to choose. She walked to the front, her steps careful but steady. The blanket slipped from her shoulders and pooled at her feet. She did not look at Beatrice Latham. She did not look at Reverend Pritchard. She looked at Elias. "Do you understand why you're here?" the judge asked gently. She nodded. "Can you tell me where you want to live?" She took a breath, small chest rising. "With him," she said, and pointed at Elias. And why, she thought for a moment. The room waited. "He stays," she said. The simplicity of it cut deeper than any argument. The judge nodded slowly. He looked to Pritchard, to Latham, to Avery. "I have heard enough," he said at last. The ruling came without flourish. Custody granted to Elias Crowder. An investigation ordered into the mission's practices. Temporary removal of children from placements under review. A sound passed through the room, part relief, part disbelief. Elias did not move until Avery touched his arm. Only then did he realize his hands were shaking. Ayanna crossed the room and pressed herself into his side. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her, as if anchoring both of them to the ground. As they left the courtroom, the crowd parted differently than it had before. Some eyes held shame, others anger. A few held something like respect. Outside, the sky was wide and blue, the air sharp with promise and threat all at once. Elias lifted Ayanna onto the wagon. She climbed up without hesitation, settling beside him, as if this had always been where she belonged. He knew the verdict did not end what had been uncovered. It only opened the door. But as the wagon rolled away from Fort Benton, the child at his side humming softly to herself, Elias allowed himself one small breath of relief before whatever came next. The town celebrated the verdict, but Elias watched the rescued children and knew that justice only opens the door someone still has to stay. Fort Benton rang with voices for days after the ruling. Church bells were rung without permission. Men slapped each other on the back in the street. Women brought casseroles to the courthouse steps as if a wedding had taken place. The word justice passed from mouth to mouth, worn smooth with repetition. Elias took none of it in. He brought Ayanna home the same way they had come before, quiet and steady, the wagon wheels finding their familiar ruts. She leaned against him as they rode, humming under her breath, the tune uneven but certain. When they crossed the river bend, she reached out and dragged her fingers through the water, laughing softly at the cold. At the ranch, Ruth waited on the porch. She did not cheer. She opened her arms, and Ayanna ran into them, pressing her face into Ruth's apron, as if returning from a long journey. "You're home," Ruth said. Ayanna nodded. "Stay." "Yes," Ruth said. "You stay." The next morning, wagons began to arrive. They came from the mission first, then from farms upriver, then from houses in town whose doors had always been closed to questions. Children climbed down awkwardly, some carrying small bundles, some with nothing at all. They stood in clusters, unsure where to go, eyes darting at every sound. Elias watched from the fence line, his hands resting on the rail. He felt the weight of the verdict settle into something heavier. This was not an ending. This was the ground after a storm. Clara Boone arrived with them, her face drawn but resolute. She directed people gently, keeping her voice calm. "Over here," she said. "There's water. Sit if you need to." Ayanna stood beside Elias, her hand tucked into his coat pocket. She watched the children with a seriousness that made her look older than she was. When one small boy began to cry, she slipped free and crossed the yard without looking back. She knelt in front of him and held out her doll. He stared at it, hiccuping, then reached out and took it with both hands. The crying slowed. Ayanna sat beside him until he was quiet, then returned to Elias empty-handed, but lighter somehow. "You gave him your friend," Elias said. She nodded. "He needs." "Yes," Elias said, "he does." 2 bears came in the afternoon, walking rather than riding, his steps unhurried. He stood at the edge of the yard for a long moment, taking in the sight of children scattered beneath the cottonwoods of Ruth. Ladling stew of Clara crouched beside a girl with tangled hair. "You stayed," he said, when Elias joined him. "Yes." 2 bears inclined his head. "Good." He knelt in the dirt and drew a small circle with his finger. Ayanna approached him, eyes curious. "This is a place," he said to her. "You make it by standing in it." She watched him draw, then placed her foot inside the circle. 2 bears smiled just a little. The authorities came the following week. Men with papers and stiff voices. They asked questions. They counted children. They spoke of temporary arrangements and future placements. Elias listened. He answered when asked. He did not offer more than was required. At night, when the yard was quiet and the children were sleeping in borrowed beds and bedrolls, Elias walked among them, checking blankets, adjusting pillows, sitting with those who could not yet sleep. Some startled at his presence. Others reached for him without knowing why. He stayed. Ruth found him one night sitting on the floor beside a girl who would not stop shaking. He had not touched her. He simply sat close enough to be seen. "You don't have to do this alone," Ruth said. "I know," Elias replied, "but I have to do it." The mission closed its doors under investigation. Reverend Pritchard was seen once more in town, his collar unbuttoned, his Bible absent. He did not look at Elias when they passed. Beatrice Latham left Fort Benton quietly. Her house shuttered, her carriage gone before dawn. Some said she had family back east. Others said she would not be missed. The children did not ask about either of them. Weeks passed. Some children were claimed by relatives who came forward, faces pale with regret. Some were placed with families Clara trusted. Some stayed longer, learning the rhythm of the ranch, the comfort of predictability. Ayanna changed in small ways. She slept through the night more often than not. She laughed without checking first. She rode Willow with Elias's hands steadying her at the waist, her back straight, her face alight. One evening, as the sun bled into the hills, Ayanna sat beside Elias on the porch. She swung her legs, scuffed her heels against the step. "They go," she said, watching a wagon roll down the drive with 2 children inside. "Yes," Elias said. She was quiet for a moment. I stay. Yes, he said again. She leaned against him, her head resting against his arm. He felt the weight of her there, solid and real. Clara joined them, sitting on the other side. There will be hearings, she said. More investigations. This won't end cleanly. Elias nodded. It never does, but it matters, she said. Yes, he agreed. It does. That night, when the house was quiet again, Elias sat outside Ayana's room, the chair pulled close. The lamp cast a soft circle on the floor. He could hear her breathing slow and deep. He thought of the river and the way it carried everything forward without forgetting where it had been. He thought of the circle two bears had drawn in the dirt. Justice had opened a door. He could see that now. But doors did not keep people safe. Walls did not either. Only presence did. Only the choice to stay again and again when leaving would be easier. Elias leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, anchoring the quiet together until morning came. Home wasn't the house or the land or the verdict. It was the sound of a child sleeping without fear and the choice to protect that silence. The first snow came early that year, thin and uncertain, dusting the tops of the hills before retreating by noon. Elias stood at the fence and watched it melt the water, threading back into the soil as if nothing had happened. He liked that about the land. It remembered without insisting. Behind him, the house was quiet in a way that no longer felt fragile. Ayana slept late now, her nights unbroken more often than not. When she did wake, it was with words instead of cries. He went inside and put water on for coffee, moving through the kitchen with the ease of repetition. Ruth had gone to town the day before to help Clara place the last of the children. Only 3 remained on the ranch now, all older, all waiting on decisions that would take time. Ayana appeared in the doorway, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes still heavy with sleep. She patted across the floor and wrapped her arms around his waist without speaking. "You're up early," he said. She nodded into his shirt. "Snow." "Yes," he said. It came and went. She pulled back and looked up at him. Like bad things, Elias considered the question. "Some," he said. "Not all." She seemed satisfied with that. She climbed into her chair and watched him pour coffee, her chin resting in her hands. Later, they walked down to the river. The water ran dark and steady, carrying bits of ice along its surface. 2 bears waited on the far bank, as he often did, as if the place itself had learned his timing. Ayana crossed first, careful on the stones, Elias's hand steady at her back. 2 bears greeted them with a nod. "You have many mornings now," he said. "Yes," Elias replied. 2 bears crouched and dipped his fingers into the water. "The river keeps moving," he said, "even when it looks the same." Ayana watched the ice drift past. "I move," she said. 2 bears smiled. "Yes." They sat together for a while, listening to the water. Elias felt the quiet settle into him, deep and unforced. When they stood to leave, 2 bears placed a small carved token into Ayana's palm, smooth and worn. "So you remember," he said. She closed her fingers around it. "I remember," she replied. The winter deepened. Snow came and stayed. The ranch grew still, its rhythms slower, more deliberate. Elias taught Ayana how to split kindling, how to tell when the stove needed feeding. She learned quickly, her focus, steady her hands, sure. On long evenings, they sat by the fire. Sometimes Ruth read aloud. Sometimes Clara visited, her voice filling the room with news of the town, of hearings and closures, of slow change met with resistance and persistence both. One night after Clara had gone, Ayana leaned against Elias and stared into the fire. "They don't come back," she said quietly. "No," Elias said. "But they're safe," she added. "Yes," he said, feeling the truth of it settle. She turned her face up to him. "I'm safe." Yes, he said again, and this time the word felt complete. Spring came late but strong. The river swelled, carrying winter away. Grass pushed through the mud, stubborn and green. The ranch filled with sound again. Birds whined the low nicker of horses. Elias watched Ayana run with the older children, her laughter bright and unguarded. He felt something ease in his chest that he had not known was still tight. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Fort Benton. Elias read it slowly, then folded it and set it aside. The investigations would continue. The mission lands would be repurposed. There would be more hearings, more stories brought into the light. Ruth watched him from across the table. "You all right?" "Yes," he said. "I am." That evening, Elias and Ayana stood at the edge of the pasture watching Willow graze. The sun dipped low, turning the sky soft and wide. "Can I stay always?" Ayana asked. Elias did not answer right away. He crouched to her level, meeting her eyes. "You can stay as long as you want," he said. "And if someday you choose to go, I'll still be here." She thought about that. Then she nodded. "I stay." He smiled, a real one, unguarded. "Good." As night settled, Elias pulled his chair outside her room one last time out of habit, then paused. He listened. Her breathing was deep, and even the kind that came from trust. He moved the chair back to its place by the window instead. Later, as he lay in bed, he thought of the day at the auction, of the moment he had stepped forward, without knowing where it would lead. He understood now that staying was not a single act, but 1,000 small ones chosen daily. Outside, the river kept moving. Inside, the house held its quiet. And in that quiet, Elias found what he had not known he was searching for, not redemption, not resolution, but something steadier. A life shaped by presence. A child unafraid to sleep. A place made whole not by law or victory, but by the simple, enduring decision to remain. The educational lesson learned from this story is that doing the right thing often begins quietly, with one person choosing to stay when it would be easier to look away. It reminds us that real care is shown through steady presence, patience, and small daily acts, not grand speeches or perfect answers. The story suggests that healing for both children and adults comes less from fixing the past and more from creating safety in the present. In later years especially, it affirms that our willingness to stand firm, to listen, and to remain can still shape lives in meaningful and lasting ways.